We are going to discuss about regional responses to foreign information manipulation and interference, or shortly called FIMI. And we will explore how the rise in geopolitical tension, especially in the region of the Southeast Asia, alongside the rapid development of generative I believe many of us, if not all of us, using AI today, or at least we ever encountered with AI today, how it has heightened the need to observe and also address the prevalence of foreign information manipulation and also the interference. Of course, this practice have the potential to disrupt democratic process. It brings impact to many factors, destabilizing social order as well, and also infringe upon intellectual property rights, and also one of the most frightening concerns related to the privacy of the population. So today we are going to have the discussion to help us delve deeper into this important topic. We are honored to have four distinguished speakers in our panel today, and let me introduce the panelists. We have Ms. Mary Elize Mendoza from University of Philippines, Diliman. Please give applause to Ms. Mary, thank you. And also Mr. Farhan Julianto from the University of Melbourne. Yes, warm applause for him. And also follow up with Mr. Pieter Pandie from Center for Strategic and International Studies Indonesia. Warm applause for him. And also last and definitely not least, Ms. Pratiwi Utami, the lecturer from the Department of Communication, Universitas Gadjah Mada. Right. Okay, so we are going to move forward with the discussion. We are going to have 120 minutes, so it's gonna be 2 hours in here. But the mechanism of how the panel gonna be is that we are going to invite 2 panelists first in here, and then each panel will, each speaker will have 20 minutes to present their materials, and then we will follow up with a discussion for 20 minutes, and then later on we will invite the second batch of other 2 panelists, and we'll do the same for that. Okay, so for the very first session, we will begin today's session with Ms. Mary Elize Mendoza. Please come forward, who will share her perspective on unity in diversity and how to address disinformation and foreign information manipulation and interference in Southeast Asia. Also, I would like to invite Mr. Farhan Julianto to be here as well. And after that, we will begin the discussion. So yeah, how are you? Hope everything is well with you. I think you can also use this screen. Okay, we will begin today with your session, Ms. Mary Elize Mendoza. I believe that the issue, the bringing issue related to the unity in diversity and how to address disinformation and also FIMI in Southeast Asia become a very prominent issue today, because if we know that Southeast Asia ranging from a lot of countries, and also it has different kind of approaches, it requires a lot of multi-stakeholder collaboration as well. So I hope that you can share the materials with us. The presentation is already ready. Okay, so the time is yours. Yeah.
I can stand
Or you prefer
That's okay. This is okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to the organizers of this conference for the invitation. I am Maria Elize Mendoza, and I teach at the Department of Political Science at the University of the Philippines, Diliman. And this is the title of my paper. So the themes of our papers this afternoon pretty much the same. So we're going to tackle a lot of similar ideas. But in this paper, I explore the different ways to address the disinformation problem and FIMI in the region. But I particularly focus on the context, especially the contributing factors behind the challenges in crafting a unified response against disinformation and FIMI. So I have a script so that I don't go off track. So next slide, please. Okay, so to provide context, there was once optimism for the internet. We heard this from the public lecture earlier and the discussion earlier in the strategic dialogue. There was once a lot of optimism for the internet because of its ability to connect people faster and more efficiently. However, global developments have shown how the internet, especially social media, can be weaponized for political purposes, especially in elections. So the dark side of the use of digital media became evident, the surge of online disinformation. was a predominantly domestic issue. It has evolved into a broader, more sophisticated and sinister foreign information manipulation and interference, or FIMI. So, FIMI operates through covert, coordinated, and often deceptive means.
Okay, right, thank you.
Hello? Okay. So FIMI operates through covert, coordinated, and often deceptive means. It is heavily reliant on the use of digital technologies, and now we are seeing the use of AI, generative artificial intelligence, for FIMI. So my home country in the Philippines is a key example of how online disinformation has impacted politics. So our elections since 2016 have always been surrounded by issues of online disinformation. Outside of elections, during the pandemic, there was a lot of disinformation regarding the use of vaccines. So next slide, please. So the rise of AI, or GenAI, has added a new layer of complexity to the disinformation landscape. In the political sense, GenAI can potentially threaten democracy by fueling polarization if used by political actors to manufacture sentiment and to deceive the public through inauthentic content. So the Russian interference in the 2016 US elections is an example of how not just GenAI, but disinformation in general and interference, foreign interference, can influence political processes. Disinformation and FIMI can also be amplified by GenAI by making it more difficult for individuals to distinguish real from fake. Global and regional experiences also show that the use of GenAI in political matters, such as electoral campaigns, presents more of a challenge than an opportunity to maximize this new technology. So there are more negatives than positives at present in terms of our experience here in the region, in terms of using GenAI. And there are a lot of Indonesians here. In your previous elections, the candidates, they use a lot of AI, right? The cartoon AI in the campaign. Very popular, right? And then it's not really fake, but it was quite inauthentic. So, yeah. So in this next slide, please. So in this presentation, I argue that the search for solutions must come with an understanding of the contributing factors, because as mentioned, we have varying contexts, varying issues. So we must look deep into the sources of these problems. So I have identified these contributing factors behind disinformation and FIMI in Southeast Asia: high digital connectivity, socioeconomic disparities, domestic divisions, institutional weaknesses. So I will go deeper, or with Prof here, I will delve deeper, as mentioned in the public lecture. I will delve deeper into these contributing factors. So first, high digital, next slide please, high digital connectivity and media literacy issues. Southeast Asia is home to countries with the most active social media users in the world. And my country, the Philippines, Indonesia also included, is among those countries whose citizens log high internet use every day. While it is not problematic per se to use the internet more often than what is the average, the issue becomes more complex when viewed alongside our uneven levels of media and digital literacy. High levels of digital connectivity in the region are not matched by adequate levels of media literacy, leaving segments of the population susceptible to manipulation and belief in false information. So for example, in my home, I keep mentioning my home country, but of course there are also other examples. In the Philippines, a survey found that 65% of the adult population cannot distinguish fact from fake. So imagine if we keep scrolling through our phones and cannot even distinguish what is real from fake. It's really dangerous. So next slide, please. Income inequality, uneven access to quality education, and digital divides also contribute to susceptibility to disinformation and FIMI. I particularly focus on the idea that the spread of disinformation and FIMI can become like a profession, a source of livelihood for some people because of socioeconomic disparities in our particular countries. The hiring of digital workers is considered a source of livelihood in countries like the Philippines, Indonesia, and Malaysia. We have trolls in the Philippines, cyber troopers, and then buzzers in other countries in Southeast Asia. So the treatment of trolling as a major source, as a source of digital labor, it kind of legitimizes the creation and spread of online disinformation. So the attractiveness of digital labor, and in turn, the attractiveness of creating and spreading disinformation in exchange for money, is also a contributing factor. So next slide, please. We also started with this contextual point that Southeast Asia is home to peoples of diverse cultures, ethnicities, languages, and religions. However, self-serving political actors have used these narratives pertaining to this diversity to exacerbate political tensions. So, for example, perpetrators of disinformation and FIMI have weaponized domestic issues to sow public distrust, deepen polarization, and advance certain political agenda. AI, especially deep fakes, can amplify these divisions because they can use local languages that would make it harder to debunk and make it more authentic, more believable to the people. So, for example, online disinformation has contributed to deepening social divisions in, for example, religious lines, Chinese Christians versus Muslims, among nationalist lines in Thailand. And in the Philippines, during the COVID-19 pandemic, the United States, unfortunately, engaged in FIMI by spreading distrust towards the Chinese vaccine Sinovac because it is there are tensions between the United States and China, and the Philippines is somehow stuck in the middle of all these tensions. And the Philippines also has a long-standing tension with China. So the United States actually engage in FIMI to discredit the effectiveness of the Sinovac vaccine in the Philippines. And this has real implications on the people. Many people in our country did not want to get vaccinated because of the supposedly negative effects of the vaccine. So next slide, please. Democratic deficits also leave countries vulnerable to both domestic and foreign disinformation, especially with the institutions tasked with safeguarding integrity, such as the media, are weak, politicized, or underdeveloped. So weak legal and regulatory frameworks further hinder effective responses to disinformation and FIMI. In some cases, it's either the government lacks resources or it's because the government in itself does the spread of disinformation. So for example, in the Philippines, we still lack robust legal framework to address disinformation, despite it being an issue in our country since 2016. So much time has already passed. Disinformation has evolved into influence operations, into foreign information manipulation, and still, we do not have means to address it institutionally. So even though Facebook has taken down a lot of accounts related to China, our government still has not done anything substantial to address this problem. Okay, next slide, please. So a key problem in Southeast Asia in terms of vulnerability, the disinformation and FIMI would be the complexity of the member states' context, leading to varying domestic responses and challenges in crafting a one-size-fits-all regional response. Since this is the first presentation, I think we can say that it's going to be very, very difficult to have a one-size-fits-all response. And the principle of non-interference also prohibit direct interference with others' domestic affairs. Despite this, it remains possible to exert efforts at the domestic and regional levels through these three main strategies that I have identified. Okay, next slide, please. So these frameworks, these legal and regulatory frameworks, can be the basis of systemic reforms to address the above-mentioned institutional weaknesses. So frameworks must account for context-specific nuances and aim to strike a balance between regulation, accountability, and respect for democratic rights. So, for example, the careful examination of anti-fake news laws. In Thailand, I believe that in Thailand, sometimes anti-fake news laws becomes a tool against dissenters, those who criticize the government. So there's a lot of sentiment from others that it violates right to speech. Regulatory policy should also guard against potential overreach on the part of government and should focus on key players such as those behind coordinated disinformation campaigns and marketing firms that accept trolling offers from political clients. Electoral laws must also include stricter provisions for transparency in campaign finance, especially those coming from foreign sources. Advertising and marketing firms should be held accountable if they participate in the creation and spread of content. And frameworks must also establish clear lines of engagement and points of collaboration with tech platforms. And tech platforms must be pressured to cooperate with governments, especially in instances of investigations of criminal behavior, enforcement of existing rules and regulations, and protecting user privacy. Within the region, there is an ASEAN Guide on AI Governance and Ethics, which provides recommendations to member states. So it acknowledges the risks of using GenAI to spread false content and engage in fraudulent online behavior. Okay, next slide, please. So all these solutions wouldn't be possible nor effective if there is no multi-stakeholder collaboration. Governments and platforms can collaborate to craft content moderation policies that do not suppress the freedom of expression. It should not be a one-way street. Civil society actors can also help in terms of tracking disinformation trends, producing data-driven analysis, and implementing public information campaigns and educational initiatives. So fact-checking. I think here in Indonesia, you also have fact-checking groups. In the Philippines, we have fact-checking groups. They're very, very useful in terms of providing additional context to different issues. So the private sector must also be engaged because they have a lot of expertise. Regional bodies and international groups can support governments and domestic actors through investments in media literacy, provision of tools and expertise and other capacity building measures. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, in terms of media, digital literacy, and civic education initiatives, we discussed this earlier in the plenary sessions that AI-generated content is becoming more and more difficult to detect. Before, we can easily look at hands. That was the first indicator before. If the hands look a little bit weird, then that's AI. But now it's becoming more and more convincing because of the retraining of the algorithm. So the media digital literacy educational initiatives must also keep up with these changes. So public awareness campaigns supported by different stakeholders should also be mindful of different age groups, linguistic communities, and socioeconomic backgrounds. Vulnerable and marginalized sectors should be prioritized. For example, there is a regional example of ASEAN Digital Literacy Program from 2022 to 2024, which empowers youth-led grassroots education awareness campaigns. So that's good. Educational institutions are expected to lead not just in terms of literacy. Of course, schools are expected to teach students to read, write, comprehend. But civic education is also important because, as we have discussed earlier, FIMI actors, disinformation actors often tap into pre-existing biases of the people. What are people angry about? We're going to use those narratives to make them more angry. So civic education is important so that, to make citizens less susceptible against disinformation campaigns. A civic education program that highlights the importance of diversity, awareness of social issues, and a better understanding of the country's landscape can make citizens less susceptible to these polarizing tactics. So in Myanmar, Facebook played a role in the proliferation of hate speech against the Rohingya minority. So if people are made more aware regarding this issue, then hopefully there will be less tendency for them to believe in all these hate speech and so on. Okay, next slide, please. So an overarching, all-encompassing, and top-down regional response is not feasible in Southeast Asia, given the diverse character of the regions, but still, a series of domestic responses that incorporate lessons and best practices offer countries a fighting chance against disinformation. So as each of the proposed sets of solutions, which I have discussed earlier, corresponds to the different contributing factors, more or less. So these forming legal and regulatory frameworks can facilitate structural reforms to address institutional weaknesses, which is a contributing factor. Multi-stakeholder collaborations can also check the potential overreach of government power, and they can also bridge socioeconomic gaps, especially by pooling resources and expertise. Investments in media and digital literacy and civic education can empower citizens to be more responsible producers and consumers of information and increase their resistance against false narratives. Okay, second to the last slide. Regional platforms like ASEAN is crucial by facilitating dialogue, sharing best practices, and providing support for capacity building measures, especially in resource-constrained member states. There are countries that are outperforming the others in terms of educational milestones, while there are those that are lagging behind. So these gaps must be addressed, and this is where the crucial role of platforms like ASEAN lies. Maybe offering incentives also to countries to adopt some of the guidelines platforms would be good. The fight against disinformation requires concerted efforts, especially with FIMI and GenAI. As mentioned earlier, AI keeps evolving in a very fast pace, and it's very difficult to keep up. Despite varying contexts, it is a shared responsibility among states and citizens to make sure that citizens are empowered to think critically, institutions are trustworthy, and that narratives that inform public discourse are truthful and resilient against manipulation. I'm on time, so the next slide is my thank you slide. Maraming salamat, terima kasih.
Right. Thank you so much, Miss Mary Alice Mendoza. Oh wow, like right on time, right on time. Appreciate that. Okay, as you also mentioned about how Indonesian organization combating this kind of disinformation, hoax, and also malinformation, we have Mas Zek in here. Mr. Zek is coming from the Mavindo. Yeah, Mavindo. Wow, right. That's a good one. Fact checking, right? Okay, so thank you so much. I highlight several points. The first one related to the how this Southeast Asian countries, consisting a lot of countries with how the social political vulnerabilities that they each own, and also the different contexts that they have, and also how this domestic regional responses coming from the legal framework and also multi-stakeholders collaboration become necessary points, entry points to combat this FIMI challenge related to the generative AI. Thank you so much. Yeah, and also talking about that, we are moving forward to Mr. Farhan Julianto. Okay, you'd like to switch the seating? That's okay, right? Who will discuss about how to improve Southeast Asia's resilience to foreign information manipulation and interference facilitated by generative AI. So we are looking forward for your presentation. The same as the previous presenter, you have 20 minutes to discuss, and the floor is definitely yours.
Thank you, Mbak Syaifa. And I would like to also thank CSIS and CFDS for hosting this event, and this is a very important event. And considering that generative AI is actually widely adopted and widely used, and even in like everyday use, we use AI to cook a turkey, for example, or to become our therapist. So that's why we tackle this issue to make sure that the development of AI is followed by the appropriate regulatory frameworks. So in this paper, or in this presentation, distinguishing myself from Maria here, I'm not gonna talk about what is the cause, what's the main cause of FIMI, but I'm gonna talk about which framework, which legal framework that can capture this phenomenon, and I will explain in my slides why the current regulatory framework is not enough, either domestically or internationally, through public international law. So next slide, please. So this is the outline of my presentation. I'll start with the basic premises to show you the introduction to my topic, and then I'll briefly cover FIMI in Southeast Asia. Of course, my colleague Pieter will explain more on that. And also, I will explain on the regulatory aspects. So from three aspects of laws, the first one is public international law. So it's state versus state in a way. And then intellectual property laws, which is very popular in Indonesia recently, and privacy law. And I will suggest regulatory improvements in the end of my presentation. Next slide, please. Okay, I'll start with the basic premise. We know that the use of generative AI is increasing. We have a lot of data that shows that even companies are basically force people to resign in place of more effective AI. And the main question that we need to ask to ourselves as researchers or also as policymakers is the generative AI is assistive to humans, or is it determinative? So how AI change our role, or our role changed by AI? Because the current approach is risking the human in AI itself. So we're lacking control in terms of what the AI can do, and there is an afraid, a scare that the AI might develop faster than the law, and it's already happening, by the way. Yep. And also you know that AI can provide a realistic fabricated content, maybe through deepfakes, and there is also an increasing risk of FIMI. And we know that from Professor Ang Peng Hua's presentation that the diversity of information is also diluted because the AI only outlined the most common, the most popular information that is generated day by day, and as process goes, that's what's happening. And also there are regulatory gaps, which I will explain further in my slides, and also there is also a need to update and respond, and we should applaud this event as a forum for discussion and also a knowledge production on AI to avoid a dominant narrative over AI from a country or specific countries. Next slide, please. Okay, briefly on FIMI, I think Maria has explained it very well in her presentation. But what I would like to point out is the FIMI, based on literature that I found, is actually a Western concept, a Western-oriented concept. It is mostly adopted in policy papers of the Western states, so like NATO, US, UK, EU, France. So these states can, we can consider them leading in terms of cyber capabilities, so to speak. But it does not necessarily means they are the good guys here. They're not the only country, they're not doing FIMI themselves maybe, I don't know. But as Maria already showed, that they are doing FIMI, but they are assigning the blame to other countries. Like if you see the policy papers from the Western states, they also mention some common countries who are blamed for this FIMI. So if you look at the policy paper, they mostly mention China, they mostly mention Iran, Turkey, and other countries, Nigeria. So what I would like to emphasize here is that there needs to be an alternative approach in FIMI from us, from countries, from developing states in Southeast Asia, for example, to understand that FIMI is actually, for me, is an umbrella concept for malinformation, disinformation, and misinformation. And what differs one from another is the malicious intent and the misuse of either truth or fake information. And we must also take into context that there are some phenomena in Southeast Asia that is specific to Southeast Asia. For example, like hostile information campaigns, which creates public sentiments both domestically and internationally. Cyber threats, the Philippines have lots and lots of experience in cyber threats, especially because they were quite involved in the South China Sea. And also covert funding of either pressure or interest groups. There are some examples in Singapore, if I'm not mistaken. There are some covert funding to certain groups. Next slide, please. So from public international law perspective, to understand, states are limited in terms of their conduct from several treaties and customary international law. So basically, the UN Charter, Article 25, which is almost all states are members of, already mentioned there is sovereignty and non-intervention. But the question is, does sovereignty or non-intervention includes the digital landscape? And then number two, due diligence obligations. So technically in international law, states are obliged to conduct due diligence obligations to make sure that their conduct is not harming another states. But also there's a question, does it also includes a digital landscape where the physical damage is not apparent? I mean, FIMI is obviously impactful to the society, but there is no explosion, there is no blockbuster car crash, or there is no bombs being dropped. But does that cover under the UN Charter? And then there's also a question of attribution, and how do you assign the blame of this breach? How do you know that this country did this, or this country attacked this country? And it's hard because sometimes FIMI is conducted by private actors or private entities who have no chain of command. It's not like the general sense order to privates or to soldiers. Sometimes it's an entirely different chain of command compared to states. And also the lack of hard law. For most of you who is an observer, I think, in cyber security knows there's a Italian manual, but again, the Italian manual is not an instrument of hard law under international law because it's only a guidance, right, by Syaifa, and only applies to certain states. And next slide, please. And also, yeah, this is the popular ones, and I would like to start with the question of what's the point of international intellectual property law and why it is important. Because what we see in the Indonesian media recently is all about royalties, cafes paying monies to the collective management agency. Yeah. And I would like to point out that the point of intellectual property law is not about monetization. It's not about paying certain amount of money to the collective management agency. But it's about giving credits to the rights holders, and we should avoid, in any case, like prioritizing money above everything else in terms of these intellectual property laws. So intellectual property laws are standardized through the WIPO, the World Intellectual Property Organization, and then the TRIPS agreement, which is governed by the World Trade Organization. I'm not going to delve into the details of each agreement because it would be boring and it would be very, very long, 300 pages, and I would not complete it in like 9 minutes left. And what I would like to point out is that copyright law has exceptions. It means that you don't have to pay royalties or any other fees if there are certain cases. So we have like this 3-step cases, so special cases, and you cannot also like disrupt the exploitation efforts, and then you cannot also prejudice the legitimate interests of the rights holders. And the definition of these 3-step cases is adopted mostly through national laws. For example, Indonesia Raya is never gonna be subject to a royalty because it's a national anthem. Come on. And the 3-step cases in Indonesian law specifically also covers a lot of things. For example, from the US law, for example, photos from the NASA, the space agency, is not subject to any royalties, but you still need to pay credits to NASA when possible. So, and sorry, and these exceptions is called the fair use doctrine. So if you use the how to call it, the source materials fairly, like in a very minimal account, or is it like certain special cases, or is it just maybe a minor of overall data? Data is called a fair use. And the problem with generative AI is there is an legal proceedings on copyright infringements. For example, the popular one is between New York Times and the OpenAI. So basically, New York Times, a popular newspaper in United States, accused OpenAI, which is used in ChatGPT, of using their newspaper data to train their model. And there are other cases of copyright infringements in the United States, Thomson Reuters and versus Ross Intelligence, and all of these cases are still ongoing as of writing this paper. So, which is we still need to take into account. And also in terms of deepfakes, fair use doctrine is very relevant in deepfakes because if you generate an image, for example, or a video from AI, so for example, if you generate a video on Spider-Man, which is a Marvel property, even through AI, most of them would look like Tom Holland, or even look like, yeah, the other Spider-Man. And that's because the AI is being trained using certain images, which is mostly Tom Holland images. And then there's also the question of transparency in data mining. So Professor Ang Peng Hoa, I think, already mentioned in terms of his public lecture this morning that when our data in social media is being, being mined by these AI companies, so what's the meaning of consent? I mean, do we even consented to that data mining? Do we even get paid for that data mining? There's also that kind of questions that we need to ask in terms of intellectual property framework. Next slide, please. So privacy law is diverse and there's no standardization. So every countries have the right to define their own definition of privacy, their own definition of data, their own definition of ownership, and so on and so forth. But in terms of generally, the question about generative AI is about the question of consent, as I already mentioned, both directly, which is from user performance, and indirectly, data scraping. For directly, for the direct data mining, so when you're using ChatGPT, for example, on how to cook vegetable noodle soup, for example, your user performance is actually mined by the AI companies and then anonymized, and the anonymized data is being used to train their AI model to become more better and better. And then in terms of the indirect data scraping, we already see that AI companies allegedly use our social media data and even academic journals to train their AI models. So there is a concern that your privacy might be breached because you're not consented to that kind of data mining, or otherwise you don't understand the meaning of your consent, and that's pretty dangerous if you're asking me. And then in terms of processing, again, I would already ask how far does anonymization works, because there are several research in Europe that find that anonymization does not necessarily works, and tracing is possible even after anonymization. And then in terms of output, states also needs to govern the fraud facilitated by generative AI. We know that recently there is fraud in our telephone lines using deepfakes voice, and which is very dangerous if you're asking me, because in image or video we can see the people's fingers to consider that it's an AI or not, but it's audio. If it's audio, it's very hard to distinguish whether it's real or not. And then in terms of governance, I think so far the collection and processing is governed by the country of origin, so meaning the AI company's parent company. So for example, OpenAI is mostly governed by the United States, or specifically the state of California, because the US, remember, doesn't have a privacy law. And then in terms of the output, it's mostly governed by the country of destination, so the consumers. And again, we need to also question what are the limits of freedom of expression here, and there is a concern of censorship as already discussed before. Next slide, please. I only have 2 minutes, so I'm gonna be quick. Cooperation, regulatory improvements. My first suggestion is cooperation among like-minded countries. I think Maria has already mentioned that ASEAN is already working on capacity building and all that. And I would agree that it's really important, but to be completely honest with you, I'm not sure that ASEAN can handle FIMI authoritatively. So I'm suggesting that countries who have priorities in managing FIMI should work together among like-minded countries. It does not necessarily mean, it does not have to be countries within the same region or within the same, blocks, but it can also be any countries. So, for example, Indonesia can work with any countries that have similar interests, like the European Union, for example, and Philippines. So, make the cooperation more flexible and more workable. And then the second one, domestic regulatory updates. I suggested several. So limitations on the use of copyright materials, regulatory materials, data protection officer, and enforcement. But the main point of my suggestion is actually about transparency. It's very important for the government to be transparent on how they can limit AI companies. It's very important for AI companies to be transparent on what they did with the data and so on and so forth. And then the third one is giving more meaning to consent. So user, you, me, us, all of us should be well informed of what consent means. What does ticking the box after a long list of who's gonna read that kind of long list and all that. So instead of aiming for just tick the box, and maybe we can make consent to be more meaningful rather than just choosing accept or agree to a box. And then last but not least is to label AI generated content and content moderation. I think it's very important. I think Google and OpenAI is already working on it. And content moderation is also important, so I'm also aiming for a multi-stakeholder cooperation. I think that's all, Mbak Syaifa. Right on time, on 9 seconds. Thank you.
Happy moderating this panel. Thank you so much. Okay, round of applause, please, to the both of the panelists. Thank you. Okay, Farhan, thank you so much for this valuable perspective. You offered a lot of regulatory frameworks that we have in here, legal frameworks, and also how illustration on how this generative AI complicates a lot of aspects, attribution, copyright, and also sovereignty. That is also becoming an issue on that. Thank you so much. Now we are moving forward to the discussion. I will open the first session for the Q&A. We are opening question from the audience who are on site in here and also online, because we are also streamed online. So if you would like to pop up the question, please do raise your hand, and then please share your opinions or maybe your question, and then it will be answered by both of the panelists. Thank you. Anyone would like to ask question? Okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So my name is Septiaji. I'm from Mapindo. It's fact-checking communities in Indonesia. So we work with 100 media on checkfakta.com coalitions, managing I think more than 15,000 articles at the moment. So basically, when I was joining the panel in a last conference in Taipei, I felt a lot of things about FIMI, because there are a lot of examples, there are a lot of motives, a lot of content, and attacking the legitimacy of the government, instill fears, and also many things. So we can draw actually like the picture, what's actually happening in Taiwan. But when people ask me about what happened in Indonesia, I cannot actually answer. I'm not really sure if is actually FIMI is happening here, if there, and what are actually the countries that are doing FIMI in Indonesia, for example. So I just want to ask Maria, what do you feel in the Philippines? What are potentially the countries that now working FIMI? And what are actually the main topics that are working on? What are their goals? And also with Farhan, because I think you need also, I agree with you that FIMI studies usually very biased towards Western countries. I think I agree with you that we need to be more independent on this to make sure that we understand the complete whole pictures. So I just also the same question for you. What do you feel in Indonesia? What kind of FIMI operating here? What are the countries that are targeting us? What are the main topics? Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Okay, right. Okay, I think we can answer first the question. Who's gonna be first? Maria first? Okay.
Move a little bit. Yeah. Okay. When you're going to answer, okay, let's just move closer together. Thank you very much for mentioning the case of Taiwan. Since I'm working on this topic, disinformation, influence operations, FIMI, I'm actually going to start my PhD in Taiwan precisely because of that reason. And the Philippine case, what he mentioned earlier, like-minded countries working together, I'm hoping to learn lessons from Taiwan to bring home to the Philippines so that we can solve the problem and answer your question. Who is our main threat actor? Same with Taiwan. It's China. So, although it's China. So that's with all that introduction, that's my answer. But of course, as I mentioned in my presentation, and he also mentioned this, that other countries are not safe from the blame, like the United States. It was a very low blow from the US to sow public distrust towards vaccines. And during the pandemic, that has very real human life implications. People literally died because of not being vaccinated. But our main threat actor in terms of FIMI would be China. But I would guess that, I would say that the impacts of it would not be, in the Philippines, would not be as massive as it is in Taiwan. And in terms of the narratives that FIMI China is using for FIMI, mostly surrounding the West Philippine Sea, the issue with the maritime issue surrounding that, and also support for our former president who is currently in the International Criminal Court. So actually, there was a lot of detection of fake accounts, and many of them are operated by Chinese accounts. When Duterte was arrested, there was a surge of fake accounts on Twitter/X and also in other platforms when Duterte was arrested, and they were able to trace it back to China. So support for the Dutertes, and then in a forum that I attended before, some colleagues from Taiwan also mentioned that Filipino politicians who are not too supportive of China are also being attacked by disinformation campaigns in their respective platforms. And then the West Philippine Sea issue is a constant thing. So yeah.
Thank you, Masdek, and nice to see you again after a while. And if you're not sure about the case of FIMI in Indonesia, then I'm not sure that it's already happening. But when researching this paper, actually I found some cases of cyber hacking towards the election commission cases, and allegedly or reportedly in that news that the servers of the hackers came from China. But I'm not gonna be misquoted on that, so I suggest you to, CSIS just recently released a FIMI report. I think my colleague Pieter Pandie will be best to answer your question on that. Thank you.
Okay, right. Thank you so much, Farhan. Okay, right. Any other follow-up question? Not yet? Okay, thank you. We are accommodating questions from the online streaming. Do we have one? Oh, yeah. Oh, there is a question. Oh, so I will move in here to read the question. All right. Okay, we have one question. How can Southeast Asia develop a cohesive, multi-stakeholder strategy that balance technological innovation, regional cooperation, legal reform, wow, a lot of works, and media literacy to effectively detect, counter, and build long-term societal resilience against foreign information manipulation and interference amplified by generative artificial intelligence while safeguarding democratic values, okay, and the diversity, okay, right. So as we know that Southeast Asian are consisting with a lot of, different contexts, and also it has different kind of legal frameworks that exist applied in each of the countries. How is it, it can be making this kind of multi-stakeholders collaboration as a region without really eroding the democratic values or maybe cultural context that they each uniquely own on that part? Maybe any of you would like to answer first? Okay, right.
Okay. That's going to be very challenging, but as I mentioned earlier, platforms like ASEAN can be a ground wherein even resource-constrained states can come together. And even though we are emphasizing multi-stakeholder collaboration, governments must still be at the forefront. So ASEAN's processes for bringing governments together, government agencies together, Ministry of Communication of different governments, Ministry of Foreign Affairs, whatsoever, bringing them together and having them engage in dialogue, sharing best practices, and even sharing resources to those states that are relatively less, that have less resources is very important. And aside from governments, of course, ASEAN initiatives on empowering civil society actors, like supporting fact-checking groups, for example, would be very important because, of course, many of these groups are privately funded, and so providing funding to these groups so that they can engage with their respective governments would be very important. So yes, my main answer would be in terms of bringing these government agencies together across different countries, and then making them talk and sharing best practices. Thank you.
So government become the forefront that elaborating all these processes from the context, different regions all together. They become the stimulator of the multi-stakeholder dialogues from that. Thank you so much. Okay, Farhan.
And yeah, I think it's very important that government is at the forefront. But I think in terms of Southeast Asia, we also noticed that there is a lack of participation from the civil societies. And it's very important to include civil societies in this kind of discussion because religious groups, ethnic groups is very important to consider because their inputs is valuable and actually they were the most vulnerable to social conflict. So I think if you want a responsive and cohesive ASEAN as an organization, it's very important for you, for ASEAN at least, to meaningfully engage civil societies. They are engaging civil societies now, but only for like 1 hour or at most like half a day. And it's very, very lack in terms of meaningful participation. So I'm hoping that stakeholders in ASEAN hear this and maybe to include more discussion, frank discussions among civil societies.
Thank you so much. So civil society also plays an important role in here because I agree with you that they have this valuable insight, yet at the other side, they also become the most vulnerable segment according to this condition related to the FIMI. So thank you very much, Maria and also Farhan. I would like to invite the next panelist so you can back to your seating areas. Thank you so much. And of course, last but not least, we come to the second session of this panel discussion. I would like to invite Mr. Pieter Pandie up front. Warm welcome for him. Okay, thank you. And also Ms. Pandie Utami. Okay. Substantively, I believe that I've read your material, so I believe that the materials are gonna be excellent, but technically it's gonna be difficult because both are having a right on time session, so that's attention for you. 20 minutes, that's pressure, right? Okay, right, so I would like to invite first Pieter Pandie, who will deliver a presentation on tackling disinformation, foreign information manipulation and interference in Southeast Asia and the broader Indo-Pacific. Okay, the presentation is already shown in here. And just like the other presenter, you have 20 minutes. The time is definitely yours.
Thank you very much. Once again, my name is Pieter Pandie. I'm a researcher at the International Relations Department at CSIS. I do notice that the time is running now and we're a bit competitive, I think, on the management of time in this panel. So I think I'll try my best to keep to the 20-minute time. I also am wary of your question on FIMI in Indonesia. Coincidentally, us at the Safer Internet Lab at CSIS Indonesia recently worked on, with the help of Maria, Elize, and other participants from Southeast Asia, to sort of discuss and compile a data set on report FIMI incidents in Southeast Asia, so I can address a little bit on the question about what FIMI may look like in Indonesia according to open source information. So I guess the main sort of discussion that I will be talking about in this presentation is the multi-stakeholder approach as it relates to addressing disinformation and FIMI in the regional context in Southeast Asia, and specifically in the context of ASEAN, being that ASEAN is the sort of the dominant, the only game in town, I would say, in Southeast Asia, as far as decision-making, consultation, and so on and so forth. So I'll be talking about that. So next slide. Right, so here I'll be echoing a lot of the sort of themes that were already discussed in the previous session by the previous two speakers, and that definitions over disinformation and FIMI are still, I would say, shifty. Disinformation, I think, is a lot more easier, I think, for governments and societies to define in their context. But FIMI is still very much a Western or a European concept that I think has not been adopted in a political context such as Southeast Asia. So if my reading is correct, FIMI was first defined by the European External Action Service by the report in around 2022, 2023, and still it's defined as a pattern of behavior that threatens or has the potential to negatively impact values, procedures, and political processes. It's manipulative in character, conducted in an intentional and coordinated manner, and it's important to distinguish that there's the foreign word in that distinction, that definition. So, and this sort of concept I have discussed in conversations with stakeholders within Indonesia is something that is still pretty contentious as far as wanting to attribute certain sources of disinformation to foreign actors or not. So I think it's a concept that still requires contextualization and conceptualization at the regional or national levels in contexts as various and as diverse in Southeast Asia. Next slide. So what does disinformation and FIMI look like in Southeast Asia? As I said before, we compiled a data set based on open source information from platform reports and so on and so forth from 2019 to 2024 to sort of catalog what sort of FIMI incidents have occurred in Southeast Asia and select Indo-Pacific countries between those years. So we found that FIMI incidents tend to rise during geopolitical events, so pandemics, global wars, conflicts, and so on and so forth, are generally sources where events where FIMI incidents tend to spike up. In coordination with that, things such as coordinated inauthentic behavior or sort of the rise of bot or troll, I would say, users on certain platforms tend to rise during those periods. So in 2022, you can see a significant spike in digital media sort of FIMI operations based on these reports, and that coincided with the Russo-Ukrainian war. So in the context of Southeast Asia, a lot of it happened in that regard. Here, I've chosen two examples to sort of illustrate what sort of FIMI operations have allegedly occurred in Southeast Asia. Elize already touched upon the example in the Philippines, where the Pentagon ran an anti-vaccine campaign against the Chinese Sinovac during the pandemic, which obviously was very, very undermined sort of people's confidence to take the vaccine. And in Indonesia recently, in this year, this was a report, an article released by the Lowy Institute in Australia, is the disinformation targeted at the Rafale fighter jets that Indonesia has agreed to procure from France in, I believe, 2022 or 2023. So their research found that after the clashes that occurred between India and Pakistan this year, where the Chinese fighter jet shot down the French Rafale fighter jet, a lot of disinformation and fake videos arose in Indonesia's sort of social media platforms that weren't verified, sort of aimed at undermining or reducing the legitimacy of the Rafale fighter jet and pushing Indonesia to procure jets from elsewhere, from China, for example. So these weren't proven to be necessarily, linked to China, because attribution is obviously very difficult in this regard, but the narrations and the sort of disinformation did occur. Next slide. And next we'll be talking a little bit about the multi-stakeholder approach. So this is something that we've discussed a lot throughout the session, and I think is also discussed quite often in the context of internet governance. So what is it? What is its history? I'll talk about a little bit about that. So multi-stakeholderism in internet governance sort of emerged in tandem with a global trend towards more participatory forms of governance. The term itself, I believe, if my reading is correct of the literature, in the 1990s in the context of the UN World Summits and the emergence of management theory in the academic context, For instance, the institutionalization of new forms of collaboration between government and non-government actors at the 1992 Conference on Environment and Development is an example of the multi-stakeholder approach in practice, as a more participatory model of governance was increasingly promoted throughout the 1990s. In the context of internet governance, the World Summits on Information Society catalyzed sort of the formal debate over global internet governance. The Tunis Agenda in 2005 explicitly called for the participation of all relevant stakeholders to internet governance. This includes, government, the private sector, civil society, and the sort of more technical community in policy development and implementation and dialogue surrounding what constitutes what governance of the internet should look like. Western governments and tech companies advocate for decentralized and non-government leadership, and resulting in the rise of forums like the Internet Governments Forum, which is an annual forum held by the UN on the topic of internet governance. So yeah, these are some examples of the practical application of internet governance as we see it today. Next slide. So there are a lot of appeals and challenges as it relates to the idea of the multi-stakeholder approach. As we know, the reason why we argue for the multi-stakeholder approach in internet governance is because it encourages inclusivity, allowing broader set of actors to participate in shaping digital norms and policies. It allows, fosters collaboration across sectors, allows more democratized decision-making, participation from civil society and other actors in relation to internet governance. So it seeks to not centralize power in the hands of government or the tech companies who, on paper, and in practice sometimes are actually more influential than non-state actors like civil society and so on. And can also enhance resilience by building networks of trust and cooperation that can be mobilized in times of crisis. But there are also challenges in relation to the actual application of the multi-stakeholder approach. Number one, as we've discussed a lot, it lacks enforceability, can reproduce or reinforce power asymmetries between certain actors. It can also risk tokenism where, civil society or non-government actors can be included in name, but not actually included in the decision-making process or excluded from meaningful decision-making in regards to internet governance. And it also assumes sometimes a baseline level of civic space and political freedom that does not exist in every single political climate. So I think this is something that I'll touch upon a lot in the paper and this presentation, is that there needs to be some sort of contextualization when discussing the multi-stakeholder approach or terms such as FIMI, as political contexts vary across different countries, especially in Southeast Asia. And we'll touch upon the sort of fragmented policy approaches in the following slides. Next. Right, so the information landscape in Southeast Asia, I'm also drawing here from the FIMI report that we recently published, is that sources of disinformation, or FIMI, differ across Southeast Asian states. This is also catered to the different political and foreign policy situations of each Southeast Asian country. So the disinformation that the Philippines or Singapore or Indonesia faces from the international context differ significantly and are sometimes often catered to the sort of foreign policy positions that each country has taken. So for the Philippines, for instance, the FIMI operations or influence operations related to the South China Sea may be more pronounced compared to countries who are not claimants or involved in the South China Sea disputes. And as shown in the example of Indonesia, it's very contextualized towards the arms procurement plans of Indonesia in the case of the Rafale fighter jet deals and so on and so forth. Secondly, there are also very, very different threat perceptions or perceptions in general about disinformation and FIMI across Southeast Asian states. As said before, FIMI as a concept is not adopted in Southeast Asia. I believe also in the regulatory approaches, I think only Singapore is the only country who actually mentions the words foreign interference in its regulatory approach, whereas other countries are much more inward focused in how they view disinformation and so on. So they're not as comfortable as in attributing foreign sources of disinformation or FIMI. Third, there's also difficulty in attributing exact sources of disinformation. Discussions I've had with stakeholders in regards to this is also, not only is there difficulty because of differing cyber capabilities across Southeast Asia, but sometimes there may also be less political will, I would say, to attribute certain actors as actors of disinformation, international actors, because it can be as if, not every country in Southeast Asia would like to engage, in this megaphone diplomacy and calling out countries for bad behavior. Sometimes they would prompt for more under the table, or I would say, approaches to diplomacy and be less comfortable in, calling out countries for doing such things. And in the context of elections, as I think Maria has also covered, is that some political actors in different countries, especially during election periods, benefit from disinformation as well. They may let disinformation fester, or participate in it themselves. I won't talk about it much more than that because the topic is FIMI. Next slide. Maybe colleagues from Mafindo can talk more about that. And on the fragmented policy approaches, as I said before, differing cyber capabilities, differing political contexts, different civic spaces, all different cultural, social contexts, these all add to the different policy approaches that are present in Southeast Asia in regards to addressing digital challenges such as disinformation or incidents of FIMI in general. As I said before, if you look at all of these, there's a second slide to this, but if I can summarize both, is that regulatory approaches are generally more top-down in Southeast Asia, in that content takedowns or imprisonment or legal criminalization approaches are quite popular. And the words foreign or attributing foreign sources of disinformation are not widely used. As I said before, if we can move to the next slide, Singapore has the POFMA and the, next slide please. Yeah, and Foreign Interference Countermeasures Act and Protection from Online Falsehoods and Manipulation that allows blocking or removal of foreign influence content and enforces correction orders in that regard. And this is not something that is uniformly done across Southeast Asia, which I think reinforces the idea that there are different perceptions on how to deal with the issue, and not all countries are comfortable or willing to say that this is a foreign source of disinformation as opposed to just saying this is disinformation. Next slide. And finally, in the context of ASEAN, again, ASEAN has guidelines on the management of government information in combating fake news and disinformation in the media. So I think the discourse surrounding disinfo has occurred at the ASEAN level. It has certainly occurred at the government level in different ASEAN states, but it has also occurred at the ASEAN level. So we have released these guidelines, but as accustomed to sort of ASEAN approaches, these are more guidelines and not necessarily binding or more hardline regulatory approaches, but more sort of based on consensus, decision-making, and consultation, and so on and so forth. Importantly as well, FIMI was not mentioned at all, so it's mostly focused on disinformation and fake news, not mentioning any sorts of foreign actors or attributing actors to who did incidents of disinformation. And that brings me to ASEAN principles. Next slide. If you're a student of international relations, or if you studied, ASEAN, you know that ASEAN's principles generally are, non-interference in the internal affairs of one another. It's consensus-based, as stated in its charter, and it's based a lot on decision-making and mechanisms are very informal. So there are preference for dialogue and consensus-based decision-making rather than rigid institutionalization compared to other regional organizations, such as maybe the EU and others as well. So I think in regards to the multi-stakeholder approach and challenges such as FIMI, who as a concept has not been adopted in this region, there needs to be sort of a contextualization and sort of a regional approach and a regional concept to discuss these issues that cater to the political context of Southeast Asia more broadly. Last slide. Yeah, and so the way forward, I think, starts with dialogue and norm setting at the regional level. So setting norms that are acknowledging of different political realities of the countries in Southeast Asia while ensuring inclusivity in decision making, but also effectively addressing the challenges presented by disinformation and FIMI. Obviously, it's much more easier said than done, but I think having these principles in mind of balancing effectiveness, the political realities and cyber capabilities of each state within the region, and also balancing democratic freedoms, I think is really important, starting with that, and then norm setting before we embark on any sort of major regulatory approaches that might not fit the context of this region as a whole. Other than that, I think strengthening track 2 and cross-border civil society networks is also really, really important. So capacity building, joint information sharing, and so on and so forth across fact-checking coalitions and others is really important, other than cooperation at the government level. Regional norm diffusion and platform accountability is another thing that I think should be part of the discourse in the region. And investing in institutional architecture after you've done the homework of norm setting and reaching a consensus on what this region should be doing in these challenges. With that, I think I can close my presentation. I don't know if I'm on time though, so thank you very much. 3 minutes.
More competitive right on. Good one. Yeah, right. So this session become quite competitive, not in terms of the substantial part, we are collaborating to each other, but when it comes to the time limit, well, okay, the timekeeper is quite tight in here. Okay, right, thank you so much, Pieter Pandie, for your eye-opening presentation. I note several points in which very interesting, we can see about how fragmented approach and, we can see from the ASEAN and the way forward to overcome this FIMI challenge. And also, I believe this one is definitely last, but certainly not least. We are honored to welcome Pandie Utami, and also you are invited, accompanied with your co-author, if I'm not mistaken, Ms. Fatia Mariu Fani Bashari. Welcome. Okay, and you will speak on generative AI, FIMI, and the Rohingya narrative, understanding the risk to political stability in Southeast Asia. Okay, the mechanism is just the same, tension, right? Tension, time pressure, okay, that's okay. Okay, right, so the floor is definitely yours.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Good day, everyone. My name is Pandie Utami. I can see the timer there, not intimidating at all. Can I borrow your 3 minutes at like it's a rollover. Anyway, my name is Pratiwi Utami. I'm the lecturer from the Department of Science of Communication Science in this faculty. I'm here presenting this work with my colleague in academia and in crime, Fatia Mariu Fani Bashari, or Fani. We are looking at a case study here after we delve deep into the concept and the general case and the observation about FIMI, about foreign misinformation and what its impacts to Southeast Asian country. We're looking at one case study here. So FIMI as a concept, just like Pieter said, it's kind of new for Indonesians as well, especially for those who, like, the day-to-day life is not looking at hoaxes and misinformation like our guest star from Mafindo here. But so learning about FIMI was quite interesting and exciting for me and Fani, so we're really excited to share it with you as well. So I'm very happy to be the last presenter here, because I don't need to go too much about the concept and definition, because already done by the other 3 presenters. So we're gonna start our discussion here with the facts, the observation that AI and democracy, the interaction between AI and democracy resulted in very ambivalent or ambiguous outcome. While AI can help us to express our political opinion in very more convincing, quicker way more than ever, but it also becomes supported by GenAI, become the vehicle for misinformation, for hoaxes, for unverified news, which also rip off our citizens' right to get reliable information and make informed decisions. Next slide, please. We believe that misinformation is not an AI interaction with misinformation and democracy is not only limited to one country, so beyond domestic use. We see that there's a risk of generative AI to foreign information, manipulation, and interference. We see that GenAI becomes an accelerator for FIMI. And the persistent digital divide. I think the previous speakers has raised about digital divide, and we put stronger highlights in this discussion about digital divide, because in Southeast Asia we have unequal access to infrastructure and uneven digital literacy. Some countries got really good in accessing internet, accessing digital education, but some countries does not. Some countries don't. So we believe that this digital divide, big gap, restricts our inclusive participation and make us more vulnerable to manipulation through GenAI FIMI. Next, please. So what we are doing here is we observe one case of Rohingya. Well, when I was invited to become the presenter and talk about FIMI, what crossed my mind personally was the case about India and Pakistan, about the tension between Indonesia and Malaysia. Although without FIMI or not, we're still going to be bickering anyway because we're siblings. But it's kind of that cases comes to my mind immediately after we learn about FIMI. Like there are some parties, some people, some actors that try to divide countries using misinformation. So what we are doing here, we do a literature review on Rohingya narratives. We pick some literature from 2020 to 2024, and then we observe a small number of TikTok videos that talk about Rohingya as well. And from that observation, we found that there are misleading portrayals about Rohingya refugees that rooted in misinformation. And that misinformation is not only because it's not really organic, because it's influenced by other actors as well. Next, please. Okay. Definition, I think we read the same source with Mas Pieter. We use the document from the European External Action Service, EEAS, that tried to reframe FIMI from what we used to know as disinformation or information warfare to become to a perspective that it's not only a media issues but also about security, right? And that the way that EEAS try to shift the perspective is to encourage more robust policy to fight FIMI. The other three presenters has already discussed about the definition concept, but we want to go into a little bit more detail here. So we found these readings about a few readings about what makes a FIMI case. So we found that there are 4 core elements of FIMI. It has to be foreign origin, and it has a malicious manipulative intent. And there are some tactics, organized and coordinated tactics, and crossing the line into interference. And this work from Pastor Galindo and his colleagues try to define that without an incident can only be classified as FIMI when it meets all of these criteria. Next, please. Okay, characteristic. So in our paper, we try to distinct FIMI with other type of sort of communication. So if obviously it's not domestic misinformation, it has to relate it to foreign issues or foreign origin, and then it's not an advocacy, and then it has malign intent and deceptive methods, and the most important thing for us is that it functions as a tool of transnational political strategy. The objectives, we found 5D here. So the objectives of those actors who created FIMI is to first dismissing critics, and 2, distorting narratives, distracting public attention, dismaying audiences through fear tactics, and dividing societies. Next, please. Okay, we're talking about GenAI as FIMI accelerator here. So we believe that GenAI has helped FIMI to spread quicker and wider, because the character or the capability of GenAI to amplify disinformation, right? So it can automate realistic, very realistic text, images, audio, video, and it's making disinformation become more convincing and really, really hard to dissect, and it's really hard to debunk. And then second, the capability of AI to do micro-targeting, right? I think we've all seen how GenAI did this concept of hyper-personalization. Any text or any video can be delivered in many languages, local language. That can, it can be harmful in this case because the narratives with the local language can be more relatable and persuasive for the locals. The third is the automated amplification capability. So GenAI enables manipulation beyond text, right? It's not only something that we read, but also what we see, what we hear. So it's kind of like we are being persuaded through our senses. Know what I mean? So these tactics are amplified by bot networks, sock puppet. Sock puppet is a false online identity created to deceive or hide the user's true identity used for deceptive intention. And then cyborg accounts as well. So cyborg is the next level of what we usually hear as bot account. So cyborg is an account that operated by bot and human, tasked to sending text, interact with users. So it's like really, really like human behavior. Next, please. Now, this problem, we believe that this problem happened and exacerbated by the algorithmic infrastructure. We cited Lim here that believes that, well, our digital space is never be democratic. It's always about capitalism, that there's always, what you call it? Gap in accessing, gap in understanding. It's never be that fair. So fundamentally, we have unequal information environment, person to person, country to country. And then what can make FIMI that powerful is also there is a social psychology exploitation here. We use the in-group, out-group principles from social identity theory. That's classic, very, very classic theory, but still related, still relevant to look at and to explore till now. So in this social psychology game, FIMI campaigns often amplify in-group affiliations while portraying targeted out groups as threats. So they kind of play with psychological, with emotional effect that we feel when we read something that probably like really mean to us, mean really much to us, or that we really hate. And then GenAI, FIMI, well, misinformation basically play with that, but GenAI, FIMI play more role because they are malign intentioned, and then there's an intention to divide people, divide countries. Next. Okay, this is our case study. We use Rohingya. I think we all know about what happened in Indonesia. So there are, the mass displacement from Myanmar has started since 2017, but in the era of social media, of TikTok, there's a surge of, polarized opinions, polarized debate and hatred, really big hatred towards Rohingya refugees during the late 2023 to early 2024, when the new arrivals in Aceh, it sparked public debate. So we're looking at this case, and next please. First, we do the literature review. We found some uniformity coming out from the literature that we analyze. So first, that there are exclusionary narratives that perceived Rohingya as the other and as a threat for Indonesians for many, many reasons. Rohingyas are labeled as illegal immigrants. lewd, dangerous, ungrateful, and even harmful. There are some narratives that kind of say that Rohingya is potential colonizer like Israel. There's narrative like that. And what we found interesting is that the negativity cycle is not really organic because it's persistent with fabricated claims we see in the media, the sentiment in mass media, and the populist policy from the local leaders, right? So it's not like, don't blame us, the users, don't blame us, the netizens, because we have surrounded by these narratives anyway outside the social media. Next, please. Okay, so that's basically the same. So we kind of found that there are issues about security, there are issues about economic burden to the locals in Aceh and for Indonesia. There are populist political rhetoric that try to align with the dominant narratives developed in the public. So that kind of strengthened the exclusionary narratives towards Rohingya. Now that's what the literature say. That's what the previous research or previous work said. And now let's see the next slide. So we observe the TikTok video. This is not a part of systematic sampling. We didn't do that, but it's kind of more like our observation during our exploration and our study about FIMI. So we found a casual search on TikTok on Rohingya refugee in Indonesia, found that 9 videos. There are 6 user edited and 3 GenAI driven. The common framing in that videos are first that Rohingya are ungrateful outsiders. The first picture is a very good example of the way that TikTok content kind of frame Rohingya as outsiders coming to our house and eat in our house, but wanting for more and not saying thank you at all, and kind of insult our hospitality, something like that. Although it's not verified whether it's really a Rohingya or really he was responding to the food by Indonesian government or Aceh government or whatever. There's no verification at all in that content. Second, that social media users as watchdogs, that's kind of one of the most dominant narratives as well. So there are a narrative in TikTok videos that says, let's keep this viral, because otherwise our government won't do anything to help us from Rohingya. So we found that framing is that social media users as watchdogs, reflecting their distrust to government and the official institution like UNHCR. And even there are one video that's kind of insult or mock or condemn UNHCR as an institution that caused the Rohingya coming to our country. And then the third video, can you please play the video? Can you click the alas roban? Can you do that? Do I still have time? Oh, no, forget it. I only have 2 more. Yes, all right, okay. So in that GenAI, in that GenAI video, the frame was that, these Rohingya people have done some sin, some bad things to the locals in Myanmar in the history. So that's why they deserve some hostility, some exclusionary right now from all over the world. So it's kind of justify the hatred, justify the negative treatment, negative narratives towards them. And of course, the the AI generated used voiceovers, localized language, and visuals as well. Again, there's no verification whether it's right or not. Next. Yeah, so that's what we find, that it's the references, especially the references to historical grievance, fuel suspicion and resentment. It's kind of proof that the othering is happening here. In Indonesia, we see them as lian, or the other, that outside it's not us, it's not part of us, so we don't want them. And it's justified for us to hate them. Next, please. The comment section is very interesting. The comment section serves as the echo chambers for xenophobia and distrust. There's a lot of hatred toward the Rohingya and the government, to the UNHCR as well. Those comments expressing sympathy toward Rohingya will get backlash, will met with hostility. Next, please. This is, okay, the politicizing of Rohingya in Indonesia elections. Rohingya's sentiment is being used to gain voices, gain support during the Indonesia elections. Mas Pieter said that it's happening during the political election, political event, and that's what we found as well. So when a candidate says, go along with the public sentiment, public negative sentiment, they got some good support, some positive support, but the other candidate who said, we need to be helpful, raise them, help them, embrace them, he got backlash. Next. The key finding. So what we can find here is that these negativity are cycled, right? It's from the social media, it's from our surrounding as well, and it's being used as political tools. What's at stake is, next, what at stake is that it kind of undermines the humanitarian efforts to save the refugees, right? Because instead of focusing on helping or doing the peace building, we're looking at how to kick Rohingya out of our countries, or let's hate them instead of, or how to use Rohingya to gain popularity, political popularity among people, instead of really doing something meaningful to the peace building and humanitarian acts. I think that's all. Thank you so much. Fanny will help me in answering the question. Thank you so much.
Right. Thank you so much, Ms. Tiwi. Okay, this one is very interesting because it is related to how the case study happened, FIMI in Indonesia, and thank you for bringing up this issue. We can see that it outlines the distinctive characteristic of FIMI compared to the, disinformation in general, because when we come to the characteristic of it, it includes a more strategic security threat as one of the issue as well, and then how generative AI become the accelerator of that, and it can be seen, for example, in the case of Rohingya as presented, right? Okay, thank you so much for the materials. Now we move forward to the second Q&A. So if you have any question, please raise your hand so that we can accommodate the question, okay? Anyone would like to ask a question? Yes, one from behind. I'm not so sure if it can accommodate you through there, but maybe if you are willing to come up front, that would be wonderful. Yeah. Hey, sorry. Yeah, okay, this way.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the time. First, let me introduce myself. My name is CSIS. CSIS. Okay. Yes, and I'm from International Relations Master Program. Okay. And I would ask a question. Maybe it's not directly with this materials, but why are we kind of being led to understand or to believe that FIMI is a Western concept and not necessarily compatible with ASEAN or the region configuration? And if that's the case, what's the ASEAN version of FIMI itself? And if there is any, and what do we do in the meantime? Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yes, thank you so much. Okay, I think this question can be addressed to both of the panel, and you'd like to answer first? Who's gonna, Pieter first? Okay, right.
Right. So FIMI itself was defined initially by the West. So it's very European. It caters to their political and foreign policy context. It caters to their security environment and so on and so forth. As I said before, why it might not necessarily be directly applicable or directly compatible with the Southeast Asian context, I can't speak for other contexts, but for Southeast Asia in particular, as I said before, is that attribution is not necessarily something that all Southeast Asian countries are politically willing to do, right? So let's say in the context of the United States or NATO, they might be more comfortable in saying or attributing certain FIMI operations, influence operations, or cyber attacks to their obvious adversaries, such as Russia, China, Iran, and so on and so forth. But for countries such as Indonesia, who have long been non-aligned, free and active foreign policy, and other countries in that similar sort of foreign policy tradition might not be as politically willing for several reasons to attribute cases such as these to, certain actors in the international system. Number one, because of these foreign policy traditions, and so as not to, point out countries for being, adversarial in their foreign policy. So I think the reason I say that it needs contextualization in the case of Southeast Asia is that, I think we need to, if we want to, recognize this as a challenge in our digital realm, I think we need to contextualize it to our sort of political context, as opposed to taking the frameworks made by, different political systems in Europe and elsewhere, and then, applying it directly. As to what that might look like in Southeast Asia, I don't believe I have the authoritative answer to that. I think that requires a lot more discussion and deliberation at the state level, at the civil society level, at the track 2, track 1.5 level. In the meantime, I think discussions such as these can start that discourse in the policy and the political realm. But what might that look like in the future is really hard to tell. Thank you.
All right. Fanny might add after this, but what I can say is that it might be the FIMI concept might be European origin, but the dynamics, the characteristic appears everywhere. So I think that's the point where we see relevance of that concept to what we see every day, and that's kind of as Mas Pieter said, we need to start discussing it. We need to start using it as a base to conduct more robust policy in fighting foreign misinformation.
Thank you, Tiwi. Well, I might just add a little. Maybe it is really difficult because this is quite a new concept, especially in Indonesia and in Southeast Asia as well. And maybe from the technicality as well, it is really difficult to identify whether it is foreign produced or locally produced or domestically produced. And I think because of the technicality, I'm not sure if we're there yet, but I'm quite optimistic that there's going to be some improvements in a while so that we can identify whether it is foreign or not. But yeah, basically I agree with Tiwi and Mas Pieter answer. So, thank you.
Yeah, okay. So one of the other thing is that in our paper we acknowledge that those videos that we found on TikToks, we couldn't verify if it's foreign origin because our methods didn't support that. I think probably we can do some extensive social network analysis, so to sort of do some bird eye view, looking at which node start this misinformation and where it is, where the network was, something like that. But I encourage us to start acknowledging or recognizing the impact of this kind of type of misinformation that in Rohingya cases, it hinder the effort to create peace and deliver humanitarian acts, to humanitarian strategy, and also that we need to stay aware that it's also because of our digital divide. So me and Fanny and I kind of agreed that the first thing first, we need to close this gap into digital literacy and digital infrastructure. In our study, we found that Asian, in responding to this digital gap, work more on the militaristic and weaponry thing to close that approach. Most Asian countries use that approach. We kind of recommend or encourage us to shift that perspective into like educate people first, so we can still digest information carefully and consciously, mindfully, before we really believe what's happening out there in other countries, even outside this room, something like that. Thank you.
Yes. Okay. Any follow-up question or maybe response to that? Okay, right. Thank you, Jess. Yes. Okay, very interesting, because when we talk about FIMI concept and we talk about the origin, yes, it is coming from the Western terminology, but when it comes to the ASEAN, Southeast Asia especially, the different kind of contextualization will be necessary, because yeah, it is fragmented and different context applies on that. And I received this online question from Noel, the doctoral program in communication department. To what extent do global tech platforms, for example, Meta, TikTok, X, etc., deploy AI-based content moderation in Southeast Asia, and how do local actors perceive the effectiveness of it? Right. Platform content moderation.
Platform content moderation.
Related to the deploying AI-based FIMI, how the platform is supposed to be able to make this kind of content moderation to, like combating the FIMI.
Okay. Do you want to go first?
Sure.
Yes.
So as far as I know, platforms such as TikTok, Google, and Meta used to, at least in my knowledge, regularly post, threat or accountability reports or something of that nature, where they show, takedowns or closings of certain accounts or content on their platforms that are inauthentic or maybe misleading in their content. So I think I've read a lot of Meta's reports where they take down coordinated inauthentic behavior, where several accounts based in certain countries are spewing similar content or similar narratives to push discourse towards a certain political leaning. This is something that platforms regularly do, but I don't know if they release these reports specifically on Southeast Asia. And to my knowledge, they're more global, or depending on where they detect these behaviors or challenges from.
From my side, I think what we can consider as well is that, from the plenary, we know that there are some. Meta say that they stop 99.9% of hoax, but there are billions. There are too much to handle, so it's still there. So I think again we need to work together. I must Septiaji mostly can say that how hard it is to fight, to debunk or to clarify information, but at least there are some organization and community to do that already. With the platform, I think we need some kind of independent committee that evaluate or supervise platforms work in a country. Independence means not governmental, but probably can contains of many elements in the society to check that Meta or any platform that works in our country has done their job in combating misinformation, in doing fair moderation, in doing justice, and non-biased moderation, you know what I mean? So I think that's, I haven't seen that at least in Indonesia. I don't know in other countries, but I think it's necessary, it's required, I guess, to help the platform as well, because well, platform is platform. They seek money, whatever is trending, whatever they just do business as usual. So I think we need some other bodies that is non-governmental, non-profit, yes, non-profit, non-governmental bodies that can help the platform or can encourage or put some pressure to the platform to do justice for us, the users.
Yes, because I also believe that multi-stakeholders also means that the industry, or in this case is also the platform, play a significant role, a pivotal role in combating the FIMI issue. Thank you so much, Pieter and also Pratiwi. You may back on your seating area. Please warm applause for both our speakers. So the discussion is definitely engaging, but due to the time constraint, we must finish our discussion. So on behalf of the organizer, I would like to sincerely thank our distinguished speakers for the valuable insight being shared today. I also believe that our today's discussion have several key takeaways, but we can see that FIMI may be a new thing, but it is there, it is a potential threat, or maybe it is already here, and we also need careful consideration and also a multi-stakeholder approach and collaboration, not only what happened in Indonesia, but also in terms of the regional parts in the Southeast Asia, with also understanding the local context and also the implementation in each of the area. So thank you again for this fruitful exchange and discussion. We hope that today's session will enrich our understanding related to this concept. And thank you for being with us in the IRIS Symposium 2025. Looking forward to have you again. Thank you. Have a good day.